Signore e signori, buonasera. Welcome to New York University, Casa Italiana Zerilli Marimò, for this evening dedicated to a lecture by Patrizia Grimaldi-Pizzorno, Leopold blooming Purgatory. First of all, I would like to thank the director of the Ireland House here at New York University, Kevin Kelly, for his presence and for co-hosting and publicizing this event. Any chance we have to collaborate with the other international houses at NYU, we jump on them, and Patrizia offered us the perfect one with the topic of this lecture. I would also like to thank Mars Medieval and Renaissance Studies here at NYU because they also co-sponsored the event. I would like just to say a couple of words. You might have noticed that in the invitation we mentioned Dante End. Dante End, it's an ongoing series that we started last year. It was conceived and organized by my colleague, Professor Alison Cornish here in the Department of Italian Studies, who is a medievalist. And the idea behind the lecture series is that we would like to present different aspects of Dante. So we started by saying we want to free Dante from the Dantisti. I don't know whether we were able to do it. We still have lots of Dantisti around, and they're perfectly fine. And Alison herself is a very serious Dantista. But the idea was to engage other people in the conversation. So we had last week the conversation on Dante and opera. We had Dante and Pasolini, and even more heretic ideas are coming on the front of Dante End. But of course, when I saw Patrizia this past summer at NYU in Florence, La Pietra, and she told me about her recent studies, I thought that this would be a perfect fit for our series. And before I give you the formal introduction to Professor Pizzorno, I just want to give you a very personal memory. Patrizia was the very first colleague I met when I arrived at NYU. She was already here as visiting professor, and I stayed and she went back to Italy. So to me, it's like having her back here. It's also a way to go back to my beginnings at the Casa and here at New York University. Patrizia Pizzorno is a professor of comparative literature at the University of Siena. She got her PhD from Harvard University. You can find all her publications in the link that we provide on our website. I just want to stress the way in which she's a comparatist. As we were saying before, not only because comparatist of different literary traditions, the Italian, the English, but also because of what she does by comparing, like in the lecture that we are hearing tonight, medieval author to a contemporary author. She has done studies on the reception of classics during the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. She wrote extensively on Boccaccio, Dante, Chaucer, and recently she published 3 essays on Joyce, and the last one concentrates and focuses on the relationship between Joyce and futurist photography and cinema. And without further ado, I would like to ask you to please welcome Patrizia Grimaldi-Pizzorno. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Stefano, Julian Sachs, and all the young people that work with Stefano and have made possible my coming here. It's an honor, and I'm moved because this Casa Italiana means a lot to me. Many years ago, as Stefano just said, John Freccero invited me to the Casa Italiana as a visiting professor. My office was a small room on the top floor, adjacent to the Baronessa Zerilli Marimò own elegant study. In that cozy garret, I wrote my first essay on Dante, Purgatorio XXVIII, the Canto of Matelda. As epigraph, I used a quotation from James Joyce's Ulysses 13, the description of Gerty MacDowell, the protagonist of the Nausicaa episode, as she limps away after her erotic encounter with Leopold Bloom. I felt that the image of Gerty, halting gait, so obviously metaphorical, had something in common with Matelda's dance. but at the time I did not know precisely what. In the last 5 years, I've returned to Ulysses 13 and have written extensively on Gerty, starting exactly from that vague awareness. Eventually, I've come to the realization that Joyce's Irish Nausicaa, like Dante's mysterious Belladonna, is a metapoetical construct. But let me give you now a brief summary of episode 13. It occurs around 8 p.m. on the Sandymount Strand beach, the same place where Stephen Dedalus had sat that morning and meditated on modalities in episode 3. The events in the episode are not complex. Gerty's friends, Eddie and Sissy, care for the children, while Bloom and Gerty enter into a silent flirtation from afar. Gerty's full attention is on Bloom, who, in her mind, has become her dream husband. Most of the first part of the episode is taken up by Gerty's thoughts on love, marriage, her appearance, and Bloom. When the group begins to leave the beach and fireworks from a bazaar begin, Gerty, who has excited Bloom with the artful movement of her feet, lingers behind to give him the satisfaction she feels he is in need of. Leaning back so as to watch the fireworks, Gerty, who has been swinging her foot at the rhythm of the religious chanting, reveals her entire leg. Her skirt is pulled up past her garter line, allowing Bloom to reach a fruitless, masturbatory sexual climax at the same time that a Roman candle firework erupts in the sky. This is Balla, Giacomo Balla. And then a rocket sprang and bang, shot blind blank, and then the Roman candle burst, and it was like a sigh of, oh, and everyone cried, oh, in raptures, and it gushed out of it a stream of rain, gold, hair threads that shed, and oh, so lovely, so soft, sweet, soft. So you can guess what's going on. This is the climatic moment of their orgasms and confirms the tacit and secret relationship that the two just participated in. When Gerty is called to meet up with the group, she waves a scented white handkerchief in reply and goes to catch up with the group. It is not until this moment that Bloom, or the reader, realizes that Gerty is lame. Bloom is relieved. She did not reveal this imperfection before his climax. Yet he still appreciates the scent left behind on the air from the handkerchief. The episode continues with Bloom alone, musing about the cruelties of women, his disgust and sympathies towards them, menstruation, Martha, Molly, and their daughter Millie, bodily smells, and the curious fact that his pocket watch may have stopped at the exact moment of Molly's ebullience sexual act. His thoughts ran on until he dozes off on the rock, exhausted from his sexual excitement. The one event in Ulysses that someone who has never opened the novel is likely to know about is the masturbation scene in the Nausicaa episode. The scene placed chapter 13 at the center of the protracted censorship of Ulysses in New York, where Joyce's masterwork had appeared serially in the Little Review since March 1918. This is a cover of a very good book on censorship and Joyce. Not that I want to do publicity, but I think it's beautiful. Censors struck first in January 1919, when the Little Review published the first section of the Laestrygonians episode, which begins with a Pope and the King of England. Ulysses crossed into forbidden political territory once again in May 1919 with the appearance of the second half of Scylla and Charybdis episode, despite the editor's expurgation of his most controversial passages, which dealt with incest, bestiality, and masturbation again. The post office authorities intervened a third time in January 1920, when the Little Review published its third installment of the Cyclops episode, containing more derisive comments about King Edward VII, with a harsh condemnation of British imperialism. Until then, the reasons behind the censorship had been political. They became moral, and hotly so, when the July-August 1920 number of the Little Review, published the portion of Ulysses 13 with the masturbation scene. The post office suppressed the Little Review permanently. The lewd Nausicaa chapter, obviously meant to corrupt the youth, had indeed shocked many New York readers who denounced Joyce and his publishers for the damnable slush and filth that it contained. On February 21, 1921, Ulysses was effectively banned from the United States. England, Ireland, Canada, and Australia followed suit. Joyce's novel was confiscated by customs officials and destroyed. This is a cover of the first edition, and as you can read, the owner probably wrote a pornographic Bible. We should remember, incidentally, that Joyce's references to incest, homosexuality, bestiality, and masturbation did not offend only the United States Post Office and the New York Society for the Suppression of Vice. Ezra Pound had a key, albeit indirect role in the censorship of Ulysses. That's so surprising. Virginia Woolf, who had described Joyce as a virile he-goat, dismissed Ulysses as merely the scratching of pimples on the body of the boot boy. And even D.H. Lawrence condemned the Penelope episode as the dirtiest, most indecent, obscene thing ever written. I think it takes one to know one. Ulysses, as you know, was published at last in Paris in February 1922 by Sylvia Beach, the owner of Shakespeare and Company, which still stands. 10 years later came the decisive turning point in the fortunes of Ulysses in the US and all English-speaking countries. In 1932, Bennett Cerf of Random House, prompted by the prominent civil liberties lawyer Maurice Ernst, decided to initiate a legal proceeding designed to lift the US ban on Joyce's novel. On December 6, 1933, in a protracted trial that centered on the notorious Chapter 13, an enlightened judge declared that Ulysses was not legally obscene and could therefore be admitted to the United States. Since then, expert readers, from T.S. Eliot to contemporary academic literary critics, have vindicated Ulysses, and Chapter 13 in particular, of the accuses of obscenity, anarchy, and Bolshevism on literary and philosophical grounds, as well as from a variety of perspectives ranging from psychoanalysis, feminism, gender studies, queer studies, and more recently, disability studies. The supposed obscenity of the Nausicaa's episode was first reconsidered in the light of what T.S. Eliot called the mythical parallel between contemporaneity and antiquity, which underlies Ulysses. As Joyce himself had indicated in the schema that he had sent to Carlo Linati, one of his supervised interpreters, and revealed, perhaps to defend himself from the unrelenting censorship. Eliot called this technique the mythical method and set the pattern for approaching modernist writers by looking for their use of structure, unity, and metatextuality. He called Joyce the scientific discoverer of a mythical method who manipulates a continuous parallel between contemporaneity and antiquity as a way of controlling, of ordering, of giving a shape and a significance to the immense panorama of futility and anarchy, which is contemporary history. In time, eminent critics in discussing obscenity in Ulysses have turned their attention to Joyce's own theory of the aesthetic of the novel, first announced in the portrait in Joyce's early novel, Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, and reiterated in his letters. Questions of art, poetics, and pornography had in fact been central to Joyce's mind for a long time. As early as Portrait of an Artist, he quotes Aquinas on the subject of proper and improper art. Proper art has to do with aesthetic experience, which is static. Proper art doesn't move you to do anything. It is aesthetic arrest. Improper art, on the other hand, is kinetic. It moves you with desire, loathing, or fear for the object represented. Consequently, it moves you to action. Thus, you are not in aesthetic arrest, where the mind is raised above desire and loathing. Art that moves you with desire towards an object, Joyce called pornographic. And the novel, the Victorian sentimental novel that is, was exactly, in Joyce's sense of the words, both pornographic and didactic, having the intention to generate desire and loathing, to urge the possession of the good and the abandonment of the bad. As Lionel Trilling, in an essay contained in the marvelous collection, The Moral Obligation to be Intelligent, says that Joyce does not seek to educate and direct the will, because Ulysses, unlike the novel in its classical phase, characteristically represents the will in entropy. In Ulysses, Trilling says, the objects of desire or intention of virtually all characters are either of no great importance, as the world judges, or they exist either in an unrealizable fantasy or in the past. Or, I add, and I hope to show you, as a mere textual construct. Today, I wish to propose that an undeclared subject of Ulysses XIII is Joyce's own theory of the aesthetic of the novel. I believe that Joyce's tight-knit interplay of elegies, erotics, and poetics in the Nausicaa episode alludes to the difference between proper art and improper art. That is, between art that arrests the desire and art that moves to action. Gerty MacDowell, I hope to show, stands for the emblem of improper didactic art. As known, the parodic style of the first part of the episode, that centers on Gerty, mimics the style of the Victorian lady novelist, the American Maria Cummings, author of The Lamplighters. The heroine of the novel is also named Gertrude. Joyce presents Gerty MacDowell as the self-conscious, sentimental heroine of late Victorian love stories and parodies its circulating library style of Victorian lending libraries of the 90s, the only style considered to be pleasing and instructive to the young person. Here is a very languorous Victorian lady. She's a seamstress, by the way. The intensely intertextual labor in Nausicaa episode is meant to deconstruct the aesthetics of the Victorian sentimental novel and expose the moral deception and the hypocrisy of a didactic literary genre that Joyce considered improper and pornographic. The Nausicaa episode, in fact, does not just reenact the encounter of Gertrude Flint with Mr. Phillips in The Lamplighter, or, as we are told in the Linati schema, the mythical Homeric encounter between a foreign man and an unguarded girl on the beach of Phaeacia, but alludes simultaneously and repeatedly to other versions, high and low, of the original erotic elegiac encounter. The discovery and examination of a pun on feet and legs, both metric and human, the same used by Dante in the description of Matelda, as I claimed, reveals that Gerty's feet also function as a semantic node in a set of intertextual relationships. The analysis of the encrypted hypotext shows that the significance of the episode is metapoetical and that Gerty has no existence outside the protean textual matter that constitutes her. As the ideal fictional scripta puella, written woman, of Augustan erotic poetry, Gerty MacDowell is a textual construct fabricated by the artist lover. She is Leopold Bloom's flawed erotic masterpiece. The hot pursuit of erotic textual desire in both monologues culminates when Gerty's disability is revealed and she is exposed as a defective copy of the irretrievable and lost original. The sight of her deformity, revealed when she gets up and leaves, marks the return to realism and the demise of Bloom as the lyrical eye. See her as she is, spoils all. But if Gerty is not Nausicaa, the Phaeacian girl pure of heart, who is she? The solution to the riddle posed at the opening of the episode by the diegetic narrator, but who was Gerty, lies in her lameness. I ask, therefore, why is Gerty lame? Like the scar of Ulysses, the fetid wound of Philoctetes, and the cloven eyebrow of Manfred in Purgatorio II, Gerty's limping foot is a symbol of recognition. Her injury is a node in a particular strand of intertextual associations within the relentless poetic polyphony and structural integration of Ulysses. To understand the significance of Gerty lameness, we must turn to one of Joyce's great authors, Dante Alighieri. In Purgatorio XXVIII, Dante enters the divine forest of early paradise at the summit of the mountain island of Purgatorio and arrives at the stream of Lethe, where he sees a mysterious, beautiful girl dancing and gathering flowers on the other side of the river. The maiden goes about alone, soletta, like a shepherdess in love, and Dante is suddenly overcome by erotic desire equal to that of Leander for Hero. Yet, Matelda is no mere pastorella, the object of erotic desire of dolce stil novo lyric poets. She is the personification or fictio persone of Dante's most perfect poetical form, the philosophical canzone. Her beautiful way of dancing and the modest Julian and the modest movement of her feet reveal her true identity. As in a dance, a lady dancing turns with feet close to the ground and to each other and hardly sets foot before foot. She turned upon the red and yellow flowerlets toward me, like a virgin that lowers her modest eyes and gave satisfaction to my prayer, drawing so near that the sweet sound reached me with its meaning. Here, as I argue in that first essay of mine, Dante describes Matelda prosodically. When dancing, her feet move forward, barely lifting off the ground, and like the stanza of the canzone, she advances metric foot after metric foot, piede dopo piede. Then, with her eyes lowered modestly, she turns ritually in what is technically called a volta o diesis. Yet, however unique, and in spite of dwelling in the Garden of Eden, the place of poetic and biological originality, Dancing Matelda as the personification of canzone, the oldest metric form of lyric poetry in Italian literature, is citational and second-hand. If we turn to Ovid Amores, we realize that not only the setting of Purgatorio XXVIII comes from Book Three of Ovid's Amores, but also the metapoetical representation of Matelda. In Book Three, the elegant Latin poet, this is how Joyce calls Ovid, entering a shady grove, sees a limping girl approaching. Elegia arrived, her perfumed hair in a knot, and with one foot, I think, shorter than the other. Her form was lovely, her dress refined, her looks loving, and even the defect of her foot was a source of charm. The enduring physical peculiarity of limping elegy with one foot longer than the other refers to the asymmetrical elegiac couplet, a hybrid verse form consisting of an hexameter and a pentameter, the second shorter than the first. If we read the Canto of Matelda with the episode from the Amores in mind, we see that Dante's Bella Donna is citational, and the breezy copse in his Purgatorio is intertextually the elegiac Silva forest where Ovid lingered with his beloved Elegia, personification of erotic elegiac poetry, before meeting with Tragedia, personification of the elevated style. In much the same way, Dante lingers with his beloved Matelda, who is the personification of the canzone, Dante's most accomplished poetic creation of his youth before the encounter with Beatrice, the embodiment of the elevated theological style of Paradiso, and his final immersion in the Lethe of oblivion. Joyce was familiar with the various types of rhythmic feet employed in Latin poetry, and reference to the system of classical feet are scattered throughout Ulysses. In episode 1, for instance, Stephen Dedalus notes that Malachi Mulligan's name is composed of 2 dactyls. In episode 3, the Proteus episode, we are told that Stephen, with a pun on metric yams and jambe in francese, walks on the sand at the rhythm of the martial octonarius of the Latins, the acatalectic tetrameter of yams. And then there are other such things in also in portrait, because Stephen always carries a very light cane, and he often beats it against surfaces. And here's, Joyce was very musical, and so he had rhythm in his mind. Joyce knew Dante well, perhaps by heart, and was aware of his representation of prosodic forms as maidens. In the Aeolus episode, he refers to Dante tercets as the approaching girls in the threes of terza rima. He saw them 3 by 3, approaching girls in green, in rose, in russet, entwining per l'aer perso. And this is a citation from Dante, from Francesca da Rimini, actually. Gerty MacDowell, I believe, like Ovid limping Elegia and Dante's dancing Matelda, is the personification of a prosodic form. Albeit identified by her name, physique, and temperament, Gerty appears less and less realistic until the discovery of the pan of metrical feet and human feet, metrical yams and human jambe, legs, reveals that, like Ovid and Dante girls, she too is a written woman, a scripta puella. In episode 13, the yamb, the unit of measurement of rhythm, made of 2 feet, 1 short syllable, unstressed, followed by a long one, stressed, becomes of paramount importance. It is the key to uncover Gerty identity. Gerty's halting gait is prosodic. She moves prosodically in yams, and when it comes to legs and feet, she is iambic and catalectic in the most satirical sense. When she sits and Bloom's mechanical eye zooms in on her leg and foot, we begin to hear the beat of her metric feet and yams in transparent stockings and buckled shoes, swinging to the trochaic chanting of the Tantum Ergo. Tantum ergo sacramentum veneremur cernui. It is the profanity of Gerty's scansion of the liturgical chanting what really arouses Bloom, the foot fetishist. His hands moves up and down rhythmically in his trousers until he ejaculates to the trochaic chanting of Pangelingua, sparso semini, verbi semine, has sown the seed of the word.
Pangelingua gloriosi corporis mysterium, sanguinisque preciosi quem in mundi pretium, fructus ventris generosi rex effluit gentium.
But it is only when Gerty leaves the stage that we learn she is lame, and it comes as a surprise to Bloom as to the reader. She rose, she walked with a certain quiet dignity characteristic of her, but with care and very slowly, because Gerty MacDowell was tight boots? No. She's lame. Oh. Mr. Bloom watched her as she limped away. Poor girl. Gerty, who is not at all straight on her pins, is like Elegia and Matelda, an abstraction, a metapoetical construct. She personifies a hybrid and imperfect metric form. When she sits on the rock, she can deftly swing her foot to the beat of the seven-footed trochee. Tantum ergum sacramentum venemur cernui, the last two stanzas of the Pangelingua. But when she gets up to walk, she switches to the coliamb, a deliberately deformed version of the conventional iambic trimeter, the limps in the final foot. This is the coliamb. The term coliamb comes from cholos, lame, Greek, but may also refer to cholos, bile, anger in Greek, because the sixth foot of the iambic trimeter is a sponde instead of a iambus. It is also called skazon, Greek for limping, or halting iamb, and was invented by Hipponax of Ephesus. The Angli-iambist produced a lame metrical line for his rongi iambs associated with poetic context involving personal attack, abuse, and sarcasm, and reflecting the moral ugliness with reference to sex and bodily functions of the poetry of his rival artists and attackers. A striking element of Joyce's representation of limping Gerty as a coliambic muse is that, like Hipponax, who used the coliambic line as a medium for the criticism of the aesthetics of rival poets, Joyce uses the deformed verse line to unveil the hypocrisy and obscenity behind the cheap sentimentality and Victorian aesthetics of Gerty's representation. From the point of view of Joyce's aesthetic of the obscene, one can say that this not so innocent Nausicaa, unlike lame Elegia and intact Matelda, who led Dante and Ovid to Stasi and amnesia, arouses hot erotic desire. She stimulates Bloom body and mind. The farcical and abusive personification of Gerty, the coarse coliambic rhythm of her limping iambs, reveal her hypocrisy and obscene sentimentality, as well as Bloom's pornographic imagination. Returning to the question of obscenity, I wish to point out that Joyce, like Dante, seems to invite the reader to look under the veil, under il velame degli versi strani, the veil of strange verses, to see who Gerty MacDowell really is, what she really about, a dark presence and a mirage. Mirage in the Linati schema is the meaning of the episode. She is, in fact, very similar to the siren of Purgatorio 19. The femmina balba, the ugly siren, who is transformed by the dreamer, Dante, by the gaze of the dreamer, from a stuttering and deformed figure into a beautiful and dolce sirena, whose song sways Dante in a moment of reverie, really makes one think of Gerty. Not unlike the femmina balba, negli occhi quercia e sovra i piedi storta, con le man monche e di colore scialba, la femmina balba, so she's stuttering, she is blind, she has crooked feet, she has deformed hands, and she's pale, scialba. Gerty excites Bloom low desires until she limps away and her false and misleading beauty is revealed. An anti-Matelda, whose beauty, song, and dance afforded Dante moral stasis, the limping girl generates kinetic desire. She herself is kinetic, and in her meta-transformation she is obscene. But not in the American legal sense, unprotected by the First Amendment, of having prurient appeal. She is obscene in the literal Latin sense of obscena, to be on show. She is on show for Bloom and for him only. Her deformity affects the demise of the lyrical eye, and when Bloom sees her, jilted beauty, glad I didn't know it when she was on show. Gerty appears to him like a dark, devilish appearance and a limping devil. A misconceived ideal, she is no longer an Elegia or a Matelda, a scripta puella who used to walk softly, but a menacing, limping female who can be discarded. She stands for the corruption of a lost original. As for Bloom, unlike Dante, his notion of aesthetics is very much one of the here and now, one entirely rooted in a world reality. He is driven by the desire for someone or something that is not there and conjures up absent presences through the fetishistic automatism of his mind. He is inflamed, but has no love interest, and like the Latin poet before the encounter with tragedia, he burns, yet Eros rules over an empty heart. Post-coital, dispirited and disgusted by his own desire, Bloom, the failed elegiac lover, is seized by the desire to write. Like Ulysses in Ogygia, he draws signs in the silted sand with a stick, but these will soon be washed away by a wave. His writing is blank. The message to his maimed muse remains an enigmatic cryptogram, interruptus. The intertextual relationship between Matelda, the hag siren, and Gerty MacDowell begs the question of the relevance of the idea of purgatory to Ulysses. The middle space of the realm of the dead between absolute beatitude and damnation, where souls spend graded penitential time, appears to be the location of chapter 13. A third allusion to purgatory is in fact deeply encrypted in the mock romantic Sehnsucht at the beginning of the episode. It sets the elegiac tone of the style of the episode described by Joyce himself, undoubtedly to deceive the reader, as a namby-pamby-jammy, marmalade, drowsy, altola style with effects of incense, mariolatry, masturbation, stewed cockles, and so on. However, a so far unnoticed reference to the opening lines of Thomas Gray, Elegy written in a country churchyard, alerts the reader to a more substantial and hidden subject, Dante's encounter with Nino Visconti in Purgatorio VIII. In his own notes to the Elegy, Thomas Gray explained that its opening lines closely paraphrase the opening tercets of Purgatorio VIII. One can argue, therefore, that Joyce's interest here seems not so much to be for Gray's elegy, as much as for the celebrated terzino of Canto VIII, a valedictory image of remarkable lyrical sadness. Era l'ora che volge al desio. Once again, underneath the parody of cheap sentimentality, we find a consequential reference to the last canto of Ante Purgatorio, to its setting, its protagonists, its theme of adultery and exile. Before I go on to this canto di Nino, I just want to say that the reading of an essay by Ronald Martinez, who died, I think, in January, a famous Dantista, not in any super university, but a very fine critic, somehow inspired me. It's one of the most beautiful essays I've read on Dante. I made exception of John Freccero's essays, of course. In Dante, the hour of dusk, complin, compieta, resonant with the chanting of prayers, languorous suggestions of erotic desire, loss, exile, adultery, and death, set the elegiac tone of the encounter with Nino Visconti, Dante's dear friend, giudice nin gentil, who feels betrayed by his wife Beatrice, but still entertains a hope that the prayerful remembrance of his daughter Giovanna may redeem him. This most representative of the Purgatorial cantos, the last of Ante Purgatorio, where the larger public vision of the preceding cantos has become intensely personal, is particularly relevant to Bloom's overall characterization, as well as to the hidden meaning of the encounter with Gerty. Bloom, as the exemplary purgatorial soul, whose desires are, as it is often reminded in Ulysses, turned properly towards the east, appears as a type of Nino Visconti, whose spiritual condition is a combination of sadness and hope. The elliptical reference to Nino and to the story of his wife Beatrice's marriage underscores also the subject of adultery, a central theme in Ulysses, as in Joyce's own matrimonial life. Bloom's sexual vulnerability, his domestic tensions, his fears for his wife Molly's adultery and his daughter's sexuality are the deep ambivalent feelings that, as we know, shape his day and run throughout the action of the novel. However, the more dramatic parallel of chapter 13 with Purgatorio VIII is with the rappresentazione sacra, the sacred representation, with strong erotic overtones at the end of the canto. The unexpected arrival of the serpent and the enemy's repulsion. Two angels come down and, send the snake away. A representation that is repeated every day. It's not just once. And is part of the purgatorial process. Here is Masolino, beautiful fresco. As you see, the serpent has the head of a woman. What else? Joyce seems to establish here a mythical parallel between the Serpent of Eden and Gerty MacDowell, called expressingly the limping devil by Bloom. That is, between the ritual representation of the temptation of Adam and Eve, la prima gente, of Purgatorio VIII, for the saved soul in the valley, and the arrival and departure on Sandy Mount Beach of the foxy girl that arouses Bloom. As in Dante in chapter 13, the hymns sung at the evening service of Compieta again, the end of the day, and invocation to the Virgin Mary are of extraordinary relevance, whereas in Canto VIII, the souls sing Ambrose hymn Te lucis ante to invoke divine help from the temptation of the night. Joyce uses the tantum ergo, the last two verses of Thomas Aquinas' Pange Lingua, to evoke the mystery of the Eucharist and mark the end of the procession of the monstrance in Holy Thursday liturgy. All songs refer to the Christian dialectic Eve-Mary, with the overarching myth of the serpent, the expulsion from Eden, and the incarnation. The apparition of the snake who gave Eve the bitter food on the second terrace of the Ante Purgatorio, and the arrival of limping Gerty on Sandy Mount Strand reenact, in my view, the drama of womanhood, Eve's transgression, and her redemption by Mary through the incarnation. Here is Beato Angelico Annunciation, and here the dialectic Eve, Mary, it's clear with the expulsion of Adam and Eve from the Garden of Paradise. However, whereas Nino does entertain the hope that his daughter Giovanna will play the part of Mary to his mother Eve, Bloom, the exiled Eastern Jew, does entertain none. By contrast, leaning against a rock alone, he yields to the temptation and masturbates. He knows that his daughter Millie is no Mary, and Molly is unredeemable. The second half of Nausicaa returns to Bloom's interior monologue for the last time. With Gerty's departure and the revelation of her disability, we begin to hear Bloom's soliloquizing voice. It has harsh, misogynistic notes that betray disappointment, as when a sudden reality smashes romanticism into a pulp. The languid inertia of the silent elegiac lover gives way to the mental agitation of the debased first-person iambic speaker, whose masculinity has been challenged and whose sense of self is unsure. Like Nino, Bloom's mind goes once again to his wife's adulterous encounter with her lover, Blazes Boylan. Molly adultery is probably the central event in Ulysses, and one that remains on Bloom's mind throughout his day. However, it is not mentioned in the Linati schema, nor does Joyce allow the readers to catch the lovers in flagrante delitto. Whether suspected, imagined, remembered, or avoided, adultery, and hence cuckoldhood, is a central node. Cornutaggine is easier. Is a central node in the meandering intertextuality of the narrative. There are in the chapter two quotes from Shakespeare's Hamlet, and from Shakespeare. There are two quotes, one from Shakespeare Hamlet and another one to Othello, that reiterate the subject of betrayal and adultery. Incidentally, according to Stephen Dedalus, Shakespeare was a cuckold himself. In Bloom's rambling monologue, Iago's lurid image of the beast with two backs comes to the surface. When Iago says to Desdemona, "Father, I am one, sir, that comes to tell you your daughter and the Moor are now making the beast with two backs." The other quote is from Hamlet, Shakespeare's own Purgatorial play, and evokes the momentous scene of the change of guard at Elsinore, only seconds before the appearance of the ghost of Hamlet's father. What Joyce is telling us here is that Bloom, like Nino, Othello, and Hamlet's father, is a cuckold, betrayed by his wife, Queen Gertrude, no to the name, and supposedly killed by his brother Claudius. King Hamlet calls for revenge. However, unlike all the raging and vindictive cornuti of Shakespeare's stage and of Dante Commedia, from Giangiotto Malatesta to Nino Visconti, Bloom is the sympathetic cornuto. Il cornuto simpatico e compiacente, the complacent cornuto, blasé perhaps, but not at all ridiculous. He is more similar to the morally tolerant type of cornuti Joyce would have encountered in Giuseppe Giacosa Tristi Amori and Marco Praga La Crisi, that he used while writing Exiles, that was set in Rome. Nevertheless, Joyce's interest in the subject of cuckoldhood is thoughtful, as one can also see in his drama Exiles, that stages the love triangle between Bertha and Robert and the other. The characterization of Bloom as the cornuto compiacente as a way of conclusion, which is never a conclusion really with Joyce, as the cornuto compiacente e tollerante, permits Joyce to explore the major issue in the moral life of contemporary Western civilization, the escape from the bonds of morality, and permits him to reflect on the new obligation this entails of tolerance for all.
Patrizia, stay. Thank you for having led us into this journey so complicated.
I know.
For having
it's not my fault, it's Joyce.
Spalancato questi mondi and being brought together from Gregorian chant to commedia all'italiana, la commedia.
He is devilish. I'm totally addicted.
Would you take a few questions from the audience?
Sure, not too difficult, please.
I start with the first one, and so this talk concentrated on the presence of purgatory and these intertextual correlations. Is it the most present of the three cantiche in Joyce, or it was your choice because you want to concentrate on certain topics?
I would listen. I don't want to say anything stupid, but I think that Ulysses is set in Purgatorio. The whole scene is Purgatorial. As the Dubliners is Purgatorial. You know, it has to do with this. Knack Joyce had for conjuring ghosts, just evoking with a little reference, quotation, a half-sung song to evoke the dead. I think very much that Ulysses, like Dubliners, is a book of the dead, or a libro dei morti, very much like Satta, no? The the Sardinian writer, Italian, his marvelous book, and it is calling up the dead and reconstructing a lost world through the memory or even invented memory of what is no more. So I don't know, I'm a sort of morbid character myself, and I enjoy this very much. Yes.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for a wonderful lecture. I'm not a Joycean. As it happens, I grew up on Sandymount Strand in Dublin. We did not think, of course, of Gerty MacDowell in those days because Joyce was not on the curriculum. He wasn't strictly speaking banned, but he certainly wasn't taught in school. If we had read Joyce and encountered Gerty MacDowell, we would simply have thought that somebody was letting off fireworks. We would not have gone beyond that. I have a couple of thoughts based on what you presented. The image from Purgatorio XIX, it's an image of a flawed or damaged woman, but clearly an erotic image. What it reminded me of so much was an iconic figure in Irish popular culture, normally carved in stone, known as a Sheila na gig. I don't know if you've ever seen that image, but the striking similarity is the open genitalia. Now, whether Joyce would have known of that. I, of course, would not in the Ireland I grew up in, an Ireland where we did not read Joyce. My other thought, as I was listening, and given that you've just mentioned that both Dubliners and Ulysses are, in some sense, novels of the dead and drawn Purgatorio. I wondered if you or any scholar have ventured into Finnegan's Wake. Now, I have read one page of Finnegan's Wake, and it took me several years. So any answer will do.
Yeah, let me go through Ulysses properly, and then we think about that. Even though I
should go back to your halo.
Oh, okay.
So we can keep recording.
Okay, sorry. Yeah. No, not yet. No, absolutely. And no, speaking of purgatory, we should remember that the mouth of purgatory is in Ireland, St. Patrick's, where there is pit, il pozzo di San Patrizio, where people still go on pilgrimages, because it's believed that this is the place where you enter purgatory. So it was a very strong image and even a reality for Joyce, who grew up as a Catholic. Amazing, really, amazing mind. Yes, it is. I know my approach is not very humble. I try to throw my, nets very wide. Maybe it's all wrong. I don't know. Other questions? Yes?
It's interesting. At that time, and probably before and after, the choice of having Cerf get the obscenity off of Ulysses happening in New York made perfect sense, since in New York, the politicians, the judges, and the businessmen were all in cahoots. It was an amazing kind of corruption. Morris Ernst himself represented Trujillo, the dictator of the Dominican Republic. So he had a nice underground life as well. So it struck me as soon as you mentioned that was the opportunity to do this. But I don't think it would have had success necessarily in another venue. You mentioned an enlightened judge. He was enlightened for sure, but he might have also been paid and a part of the situation. But I enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
Yeah, but in the Bible they say if you do one good thing in your life, you are saved. So probably this was his opportunity. But it's so, it's as it often is. It's very paradoxical. This whole New York thing started because a copy of the little review with the Nausicaa episode ended in the hands of prominent, genteel young woman, and she was reading in her, God knows, Fifth Avenue mansion, and then she dropped the little review on the floor, and she fainted, and her father went to the authorities. And then the other interesting thing is that Ulysses, the book, came back to the United States when was still forbidden, and the escamotage was that of a doctor that said, well, let's order a copy for medical reasons. And so they could actually work on it because it was very hard to find. And this is why it's so expensive to buy a copy, an American copy of Parisian printed copy that circulated in America. There was a sunny stuff, of course. But this is the way it worked.
Well, thank you to all of you for having welcomed back Patrizia.